Welcome Ultimate DIYers. Today we're going to talk about carpentry, and we're going to talk about one of the things that I get asked the most is how do you cut stairs? So we're going to actually try to go through the math. I'll show you some video of a small staircase that I'm actually it's only a couple of steps going up into a house, but the technique is the same. Actually, if truth be known, the small ones are probably a little harder than the larger ones. But we're going to go through some basic terms and help you try to understand how it works. Okay, starting on the actual terms, some of the things that you do need to understand, first of all, which I see people have problems with all the time, especially if you're not in the construction world, is the horizontal versus plumb. Horizontal is going to be a horizontal, like a laying position. And you'd use a level and you'd have a little gauge in the center with two lines and a bubble. The bubble needs to be in the center of the two lines. That is going to be, if I set it down, that means that is going to be a very level surface if I can see that bubble, which this one is. The other is the plumb. The plumb is going to be like trying to find out if a stud is plumb or straight, anything that is going on the vertical. So I would take the same level, put it on the vertical, but instead of reading this gauge, I read the one up higher. And that bubble still needs to break the two lines, be right in the center. Very simple, but a lot of people do not understand plumb versus going to be level. They do not get that concept. Very important. Now, in construction, especially carpentry type construction, you have a lot of triangles. And if you were in school, you remember the Pythagoras theorem, which basically works through triangles, and you'll have a squared times b squared equals c squared, that type of thing. But we're going to try to simplify that and make it easier for you. So we'll go into that, the math part in a minute, but let's go ahead and go through the rest of the terms so that you kind of understand the terms. So one of the most important terms when you're building stairs you need to know is, what is a stringer? A stringer is the piece of wood that actually you're going to cut your triangles into, which will hold your steps as you go up. I've got a small one here, a simple one, just a couple of what we call treads, which is going to be one of your next terms to learn. But this is what a stringer is. And you'll usually cut this from a 2x10 or 2x12. Most of the time it's a 2x12. You'll have a straight edge of your wood, and then you are going to lay it and cut the angles. Now these angles, I made this little demonstration here for you to actually show you how these angles work. And let's go over a couple more of the terms, and then I'll show you how it fits onto the stringer. The next term that you need to really know is going to be your unit run, which is down here at the bottom. This is the same triangle, just drawn. So it's my unit run. Unit run is also your tread. And you can remember tread by don't tread on me, don't walk on me. It's where you walk. So on my staircase, my unit run is where I'm going to place my foot. My next term I need to know is the rise up to the next unit run, which is this here. So you have unit run, unit rise, and then you'll have a stair slope, which will be from the top of the unit rise to the very beginning of your unit run, and it is your slope. That is your triangle. So when I actually place this on a step, I have a B for bottom, T for top. Those are my treads. I place it on there, and now I have my unit run, my unit rise, and then my stair slope, which will actually be from this point to this point. These are very long treads made for a special purpose. Normally your treads are not quite that long. We'll go over some of the basic sizes when we get to doing the measurements. So the next thing that you need to know, which is probably one of the most important parts of figuring out your stairs and doing the math, is the overall rise. Now overall rise, if you look at this, say this is a full set of stairs, you're going to go from the bottom of the stairs to the top of the stairs. And you'll take a measurement from this point right here, all the way down, and then that measurement, let's say it's 80 inches, that is your overall rise. Now, one thing to keep in mind here on an overall rise, especially at the top, if you've already got your finished floor down at the bottom, that's great, or you can actually put your finished floor around your staircase, but you have to keep in mind that that's going to change this dimension here of your rise. But the big thing to keep in mind is it has to be from finished floor to finished floor is what you really want. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone over a little bit of the terms that you're going to need to know, and you have a basic understanding of that, we're going to talk about some of the basic tools that you need just for layout. There are going to be tools that you will use that are different when it comes to constructing the staircase. But just for layout, some of the basic tools you're going to need is obviously going to be a good tape measure, a good pencil. Now you can use the square flat carpenter pencil, or you can use the round pencil that's used a little bit more in cabinet making, which may be a little more precise. That's up to you. I generally will stick with this one. The other thing that you are going to need is a framing square like this one, not to be confused with a speed square. Speed square is great. It has its place. It's very good when it comes to building roofs, but you need the flat carpenter square. And if you're not familiar with a carpenter square, you have two parts. You have the body and you have the tongue. I always think of the body as the part that I'm going to walk on. So if I put it on my little diagram, my unit run part is going to be the thicker, my rise is going to be the tongue. Now what helps you speed this process up is you are going to take your, say this is a 2x12, you're going to lay it across it and make your marks like so. And you'll keep making those. And what will speed that up is to use what's called a stair gauge. Now these little stair gauges will lock into place, and you will actually get them to the mark that you want. As far as like if I'm going 8 1/4, I go up 8 1/4, put the gauge on. Then I'll come over to this one and say my tread is 10 inches. I will come over here and I will put it on the tread. Now, if this was a 2x12, 2x10, 2x12, I would actually place these like so, and then I can make my marks. And it would be longer, of course. And you could actually just follow it straight down that way. It's a little awkward here, but just slide. So I'd make my first tread, and I would slide down to the next one. And I'll show you in a little more depth of how we're going to do that. But I'm going to show a simpler method today that keeps you from having to buy these gauges, that you can use it at home. And all you need is a couple of clamps. A couple of clamps and a straight board. You would do basically the same technique. So you would get where you actually want it, reading it at the bottom of the board, and then you would clamp these in place, like so. And now I have my stairs, I just slide this across the top. Saves you a little bit of money. You'll understand that a little bit more when we get to the layout, but I'm just trying to give you an idea. So all you really need, tape measure, pencils, a couple of clamps, a good straight board, and your framer square. And one other thing that you could use that'll help you tremendously with the math is a good construction calculator. Like this is the Construction Master. They also have a version of this that works on your cell phone. And I would highly recommend getting that if you don't already own a calculator like this one. These work much better than a traditional calculator because they're set up for the imperial system, and fractions work very easily on this. So you can actually enter the full fraction instead of trying to turn it to a decimal. So I'd highly recommend this. So that's really the basic tools that you need just to do a layout. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try to get into the actual layout of a set of stairs. So let's cover some basic math. So the very first thing you're going to want to find is your unit rise. And an ideal rise is going to be 7 inches. You don't really want to go over 8 1/4. Most of that's going to be determined by building code, and it's done that way to make sure that you can comfortably climb the stairs. So to find the unit rise though, you're going to need to measure the overall rise of the staircase from finished floor to finished floor. In our example, it's going to be 90 inches or 7 foot 6 inches. So now we're going to take our example 90-inch overall rise and we're going to divide it by our 7-inch ideal height.
it's going to give you a total of 12.86. Take that number and round it to your next whole number. That's going to give you 13 steps. Now divide 90-inch overall rise with your 13 steps, and it's going to give you 6 7/8 of an inch. So in our example, we're going to have 13 steps, each with a 6 7/8 of an inch rise. So something else I need to bring up at this point is there's two basic ways to attach a stringer. The very first way is going to be to attach it even with your top floor, just like in our example. That's going to give you 13 even steps. The second way you would attach it would be to drop the stringer down and use the header as your final riser, and the finished floor is your final tread. When you use this method, it's going to reduce your steps by 1, so our example will be reduced from 13 to 12. Let's take a quick look at the treads. The ideal tread width is going to be 10 inches, and you want to try not to go under 9 inches. So if you want to know your overall length of your stringer, you're going to need to multiply your steps times your tread. In our example, we're going to go ahead and use an 11-inch tread. If we use an 11-inch tread, we're going to take 13 times 11, and that's going to give us our total of 143 inches, or 11 foot 11 inches. That is going to be for like method number 1. If we attached our stringer as in method number 2, it would be an even 11 foot. So to be clear, this is an instructional video that gives you the math behind building a set. If you're going to actually build a set of stairs, you still need to check with your local building department and find out what codes that they use and what they're going to. But do keep in mind, most building inspectors are not going to require your stairs to be 100% accurate. They usually give you about a 3/8 inch variance. And how you find it is to find your smallest and greatest rise. Take the smaller and subtract it from the greater. As long as you have a 3/8 of an inch difference or less, you're golden.
Okay, I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of how you're going to lay out a staircase and how you're going to actually make a stringer. You'll make one stringer, get it perfect, and then you'll use that to duplicate and make your other stringers. So we're going to use our little diagram of unit run and unit rise that we use all the time that I showed you in the beginning. And we'll use that as an example. But you're going to start by laying your dimensional lumber across, say, 3 or 4 sawhorses, and you start on the right-hand side. Now the right-hand side is going to be the bottom of your stringer, the part that goes into the first floor or the ground if it's a deck. So remember that I always take and I write a big B on my stringer, so I know where the bottom is. And if you look at this, it makes perfect sense when you're laying it out, because this is the way I've got it written with unit run and unit rise is exactly the way you would start, and your unit run is the step. So you know you're going to step, step, step. So that being said, we're going to take our straight edge and we're going to lay out the framing square on it. Now, we do have our clips. Now, the most common dimensions for your unit run are going to be between 10 and 12. And common unit rise is between generally 7 and 9, depending on the code that is being used and depending on your local building department. You'll need to find that out before you lay your stairs out, because that will actually determine how many steps you have and what you can do. So let's take our example where you're going to take, we have that backwards, remember, because the body is my thick part, which is what I step on, and I use the tongue for my rise, just like so. So we're going to lay it on the board, and I'm going to take my 10 right here, starting at 1 to 10, and I'm going to put it at the edge of my board. And then I'm going to clip that into place. Now I'm going to the other side for my rise, and we're going to go with 7.5. 7.5 is a good number, very typical. So I go to my 7 and work it into the half. And I'm going to clip that as well. So now, and adjust it, make sure that it is dead on. Right there, looks good. That is off, right there. That's pretty good. All right, so now what we're going to do is we start with our first step, going up the stringer. I place the board on the top, and I will just pick a spot. You don't want to be at the very end of the lumber, because you're going to have to do a couple markings at the bottom for your landing. But you'll do that, you'll make your mark, just like so. So now there is my first tread, and then this is my first stair rise. Then I'm going to slide it over to my next. Make sure that 10 is there in the 7.5. Now, one of the things I didn't do here, which I should do, and I'm going to do that real quick to show you, is you need to take your tape and double check these first two. Make sure, because if you need to make an adjustment, you can make it now before you go all the way up the board. And by the way, if you do mess up, just get a little sander, sand it off a little smooth, start over, or an eraser, but I use a sander, it's quicker. Line it up at the edge. I'm exactly 10, that's what I was looking for. Edge, 7.5, I'm dead on, so we are perfect. So we've already made our second. We're going to slide up to the third. We're going to go ahead and put a total. We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll do 5 steps. So here's that one. 1, 2, 3. Here's 4. And we're going to mark that. Now this is where it gets a little tricky. When you get to your top step, you're going to slide it down and line up that 10 with the top of your mark again. And you're going to make one mark, and you're going to stop. You don't want to make this top one because you would go above your landing at this point. We don't need another riser. So we are going to stop right here. We're going to unclip the square, and we're going to turn it, just like so. And make sure that you are lined up on your line exactly, and all the way to the edge, and then you're going to take this mark now and go the opposite direction. This is the part that is going to ride on your framing member to hold the stairs. So you'll stop right there and it'll look something like that. And let me zoom in a little for you so that you can see that. So now we're going to work on the bottom and where it actually hits the ground. So you will take your framing square. Instead of the normal way that we did it, we're going to turn it upside down, and we are going to figure out the last, you line it up and you're going to figure out your last rise, which we're going to follow down from the very corner. It's right here, and line it perfect. Now we're going to go down to our 7.5, which is right here. So we go down to the 7.5, and then we're going to turn it to 90 degrees. Just like the top was basically 90 degrees, or not basically, it is. You will line it up perfectly on the line, and you will make this mark backwards. This is the part that will actually hit the ground right here. This is your first rise. So you have one rise up, so that's your first step, second step. So this is 1, 2, and so on all the way down. So the other thing you have to look at here though is what thickness is your treads going to be that you're going to walk on. So in my case, we're going to say 1.5 inches. So at 1.5 inches, you can just take an 1.5 inch piece of dimensional lumber. If you're doing 3/4, you do 3/4. But you're going to mark that off here. You're going to take it and put it at the bottom of the part that hits the ground. Get it on there perfectly. And one of the reasons I use the wood is if I'm using treated wood outside, it's swollen, so it'll actually all be the same. And when it shrinks up the same. But you line it up on there perfectly, and then you make your mark. So now when I go to cut, I am going to, that didn't come through all the way. Let's do it again. A little bit of dirt, I think, on the lumber. There we go, just like so. So when I cut everything out, I'm going to cut this off at the very beginning where it hits the ground. Now what happens is when I take this same lumber and put it on the top of each step, with this gone, this measurement is going to be the same throughout, because now you've got rid of it off the first one and everything else will line up exactly the same. It's kind of, you'll have to do one to understand what I'm talking about, but take my word for it, you have to cut that out. Now, the other thing that you could have a problem with here is if you were putting this down on an unfinished floor, then you're going to have to take into account your finished floor. So say your finished floor is going to end up coming up here now and go all the way across. Now it has changed my measurement here, so my first step is off. And I'll show you a little diagram of how
the variances that you can have. Most of them are 3/8 of an inch, and I'll show you a diagram and go over that as well. But that is the main issue. Now there is one issue at the top, and I'm going to show you that real quick as well.
So I'm going to cover a couple of the basic problems. Most everybody can figure out pretty quickly with the basic math how to lay out your little triangles for your tread and your rise, just like in the actual picture or template per se. So if you know that and you're setting it up, there's a couple of problems where people make errors they don't think about. And one is the finished floor. You need to take this into account not only at the top, if you're building an interior stairwell, but also the bottom. And is your floor already down, or are you placing your stairs on the actual subfloor? So if you're placing it on the subfloor down at the bottom, you need to account for this 1.5 inches. In other words, now my bottom tread is going to be, in this case, this is a 3/4 inch hardwood. It's going to be 3/4 of an inch short. So my very first step is going to be way out 3/4 of an inch, which means if an inspector comes and inspects it, it's not going to pass. It's well above the 3/8 of an inch. So how would you fix that? So if you know that this is 3/4 of an inch and you're going to place it, you're going to lose that 3/4 of an inch, then that means I need to add 3/4 of an inch to my overall measurement so that everything works out correctly. At the very top, if I have this already on, I'm golden, but if I do not, then I have to account for that 3/4 of an inch at the top. So when I actually install my stairs before the floor goes on, my stairs will be above. Actually, it will be above. So if you take this away, I would actually have my stairs up 3/4 of an inch higher than what it'll ultimately be. Now, where this is kind of a trick is it depends a lot on your stair layout, because you can take your treads and you can stop. So if it calls for 6 steps, you can stop at 5 steps right here, and your final step will be your step up. And so you'll adjust for it that way. That is one way. The other way, and matter of fact, the footage that I'm showing you today is actually flush. So if it called for, say, in that case, it was just 2 steps, it would be 2 steps up even with my finished floor. And this is where you also get into trouble, because you have to think about this. So say my treads that I walk on are 1.5 inches thick, and we'll use a 2x4 piece because it's 1.5 inches thick. So if you look, each one of my treads, I'm going to place 1.5 inches mark on it here. Say this is my finished floor in my left hand. So I will place those and I will walk on those. When I get up here, I've got a tread on here, and now I have finished floor. I'm walking up here. Now I'm 1.5 inches taller than my finished floor. So what you have to do when you're doing your math is you have to subtract that 1.5 inches out of the top, reduce that. So if my overall measurement, we'll just make it easy, say it's 100 inches, then I need to subtract 1.5 inches, or whatever my tread is going to be. My tread may only be 3/4. Subtract the 3/4 or 5/8 or whatever it is that you're using. Subtract that out of that total number when you put everything together as well. So you have to pay close attention to the little details in the beginning. Now, do not mark every one of your treads at one time. Do not mark every one of your stringers, I should say, at one time and then cut them all out. Get one, get it perfect, set it up there, and then think about things about finished floors and where your treads are going to end up on top, and make sure that it's the way you want it. Then use it as a template to mark out the others. And don't be afraid to make a mistake. It happens. We all make mistakes. Lumber's not cheap these days. You don't want to, especially on a 2x12, but it happens. But I'd much rather find out on one 2x12 than a whole bunch of them. A typical stairwell is going to be anywhere from 3 to to 5 or 6 stringers, depending on what you're putting up. But pay close attention to that and you should be okay. But that is where most everybody makes a mistake. And I will tell you, most of the mistakes are at the very top and the very bottom. So if you're having a problem, look really close at that. Look at your finished floors and look at your tread thickness. Also look at the way you're laying your stairs out. Are you going to stop if it calls for 6? Are you going to do 5 and use your last step up onto the finished floor as number 6? Or are you coming up, straight across for the landing and you're building all 6? So those are some of the questions and some of the ways you can get in trouble. Overall, though, building a staircase is not that complicated, and hopefully I didn't make that more complicated for you, but when you build your first one and you have those little issues and you can't figure out what's going on, those are the areas to look at, because if everything else in your basic math is correct, you made an error putting that math together, or figuring the things like finished floors. So anyway, so that I'm not just rambling on anymore, if you guys have any questions, feel free to make a comment, leave a comment, ask your questions, and if I don't answer them, somebody else probably will answer them or learn from them. I try to answer every one of them as they come across. Be sure if you haven't hit the like button, you do that, it really helps the channel. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. We have upcoming videos, usually anywhere from 1 to 3 a week. Bare minimum is the 1. And be sure to hit that little bell notification button so every time I do release a new video, you know that it's out. I appreciate you watching and hope to see you next time.